on our new MindDev coaching program, which is a scalable coaching program for companies. I'm designing it with a team member, Amy Rice, who's our director of coaching. Amy may be joining us today, but she may have a scheduling conflict. We're going to wait and see. But happy to dig in. It's really an exciting time for Mindful Life, Mindful Work. The MindDev coaching program has sort of been a dream, a scalable coaching program that we can literally go in to companies and provide scalable solutions to create real culture change at scale. Something, the vision is to go into companies with literally 50 to maybe even 1,000 coaches at a time, and coach whole middle manager teams or senior leadership teams, depending on the company's side, how many individuals we're talking about. So this webinar is meant to be informational, but it's also meant to be a chance for folks to ask questions. So hopefully folks are dialing in from either LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook or through the Eventbrite offering and event. Today, we're going to focus on a few key areas. We're going to focus on team collaboration uh, and especially on communication in that regard. And then we're also going to focus on productivity. And I think this is really important because I think one of the things we're seeing and have seen over the last decade for leadership development, team development, purpose and meaning work is when you get people aligned, and I'll talk more about what that means. But when you get people aligned, then more becomes possible. And I think things that sort of old ways of doing business failed at, frankly, was they didn't really get people aligned. They sort of got them aligned on, oh, this is what we want to do as far as selling this thing, whether it's a service or a product. But they didn't really get them aligned on anything deeper than that in many instances. And I think that's part of the reason you're seeing, and we talked about this before, but the great exodus in sort of corporate cultures. People don't want to just do the thing in a vacuous way. They want to do the thing, make money, make the world a better place, because there's some deep alignment amongst team members and ultimately team members with the company. I mean, that's the ideal. And I think a lot of companies are falling short because they're not doing that. They're not saying, oh, if you guys don't care about us, we got a problem. It's, you shouldn't just care about a paycheck. Of course, you need to get paid. You need to create a living for yourself and your family. But if that's it, you can go do that somewhere else. And that's why people are doing that somewhere else. It has more meaning and purpose and more aligned values and things like this. So let's dig into the first area of team collaboration and communication and why a mindfulness informed coaching program. And that's really what MindDev is. And so and we talk about this a little bit in each of these webinars in the series, but let's break down just a tiny bit what mindfulness informed coaching is. Mindfulness informed coaching is ultimately the coaches have some relationship to self-awareness work, because it's a coach's self-awareness that informs the work and the relationship, because ultimately a coaching relationship, one that's focused on a coaching mindset or a growth mindset, needs that relational piece. I think that's why a lot of coaching feels mechanical. If the coach isn't bringing their own awareness and they're just bringing content rather than process in to support that content, then it's just content. Then it's just bites of information that don't really get applied in any real integrated or grounded or embodied way. And so one of the things that a mindfulness informed coaching approach brings is it brings that embodiment. The coach has the awareness or a practice of awareness. It almost doesn't matter exactly what level their awareness is at, but when we bring a mindful or mindfulness-based approach to something, that informs it in a new way. And it's sometimes hard to explain that. it's not really intangible. It's very tangible when you're in it experientially. But if you haven't had that experience, maybe we can liken it to when you're relating to other folks. You can sort of feel when a given person has some gravitas. You feel connected to them. Why do we resonate with some people more than other people? Well, ultimately, I would say that it's some degree of presence that they have that helps us connect to them. It's not always just their professional expertise and the information they know and the experience they have. It's who they are as a person and who they are as an awake or aware person. And so, one of the things that a mindfulness coaching program helps support is the development of that in individuals, but also systemically. I want to welcome Amy. Amy, thanks for being here. I'm just sort of breaking down a little bit mindfulness informed coaching again to sort of set the format for talking about team collaboration and productivity and focus and the things that we're going to address today. But back to the matter at hand, as far as how does being mindful make any difference at all? It brings us into this realm of process. It brings us into this realm of it's a felt sense shift. Years ago, I was trained as a psychotherapist, and one of the things in psychotherapy is um, a person doesn't need better understanding to resolve whatever they're working on. They need a different felt sense experience. They need to feel different to make a real shift. And so that's one of the things that companies fall short on is they think just by giving people better information, it's going to help. And sometimes it might help a little bit. But if the team doesn't have a felt sense shift, if they don't feel differently because of the training or because of the work that they're doing, no real change is going to happen. Just look at your own life. If you learned a new piece of new information, uh, it might have affected you for some time, but then you forget it. But if you read a really good book that makes you feel a certain way, you might remember that book for the rest of your life, and it might inform the way that you move through life for the rest of your life. And so that ultimately, a mindful approach is both very relational, but it's also very experiential in the way that those experiences situate and embed both in individuals and teams. Um, so let's look a little bit more at team collaboration. Amy, do you have anything you want to say to sort of launch us into team collaboration and communication and how a mindful approach supports that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned presence, which is really what this mindfulness informed coaching is all about. But the idea of becoming more present in the moment really helps us to be aware of our interactions so that we can approach them in a way that is not only self-serving but also incorporates all perspectives. So it allows us to be better active listeners, which is, of course, is a key element in communication. And it allows us to be less reactive and more aware of our emotional center so that we can approach conversations and collaborations from a place of neutrality. And so, yeah, um, I think it is absolutely integral for effective and efficient communication amongst teams and to instill this idea of focus, but not from a place of like trying to just accomplish the task at hand, but rather focus because of presence and because there is a general understanding amongst a team, so that you can move in unison.
Hmm. I think that's I mean, one of the points that you made, even when you first started sharing, I think is really essential is that ability to align to whatever the purpose is. I think so often we sort of get overly concerned with our own performance. And should we care about our own performance? Sure. But why? And how it tucks into the greater performance. And I think a mindful approach or a present based and process based approach helps us join that in a way that, we've sort of all heard about being in the flow or the zone or sort of like selfless service. Well, what creates that? What creates that is that we care about something more than how we look in any given situation. And in the current sort of ethos and landscape as far as business, it's all about individual rewards and sort of like who's the top performers and all of that. And that might seem like, oh, that encourages healthy competition, but ultimately it just becomes myopic in that it's rewarding small pieces that aren't actually acting in isolation. The salesperson who's a top salesperson, they couldn't do what they did if people weren't giving them information and things to be able to be the top salesperson. That person didn't do it alone, even though it may appear that they did it alone. And so I think coming from this systemic, multi-perspectival approach that you're naming is all of a sudden people become a little more humble in a healthy way and more grateful for the shoulders that they were stood upon that helped them achieve great results. Um, it's again, it's short-sighted and pretty misguided to think that we do things alone. Um, I think it was, I mean, just think about the breakfast you had this morning. Did you raise the chickens that laid the eggs? Probably not. Most of us can't say that we did. Did you uh, did you go to a ceramics class and make the plate that you ate the egg on? No. I mean, all of that was contributed. And you can say, "Oh, I made the money that bought those things." But again, without people creating that value, your money doesn't mean anything because you can't buy those things because they don't exist. And I think the same shows up in team communication and productivity, is when we recognize that this is unattainable by myself. Then all of a sudden, and I think that's a mindful practice. I think that our expanded awareness shows us that undeniably, not as some, oh, I sort of understand that theoretically. No, you feel it in your body and in your experience, and there's no going back because you now know it. You don't believe it, you don't even think it, you know it. And I think that's a really essential part of what we're fostering with MindDev, with the coaching program that we're sharing about is in order to scale greatness, you got to recognize that you can't have a bunch of individuals. You have to have an organism that people are connected and pieces and not cogs in a wheel, cogs in a machine like the old mechanistic model, but living pieces of the organism.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do we create the awareness around how our individual impact affects the greater dynamic? And that really is through self-awareness initially, so that we can, encourage in ourselves and in one another this idea of empathy and understanding, because ultimately we're all human, and so we're all dealing with the same struggles, and so when we can get on that human level and understand one another, that's, I believe, where the flow starts to integrate into our interactions.
And so, thank you for that. And so, when a team is being more mindful, um, how does that show up in your experience with the way that they communicate with each other? What are some real tangible things that happen when a team is more mindfully sort of moving together in this way?
Certainly more symbiotic, like synergies. Everyone's moving with a common purpose. Um, Better focus, as we discussed, which includes, not just this idea of concentration, but also a general awareness. Um, And then, I'd also bring in this idea of creativity, because mindfulness definitely elicits that in us, sort of a more open-mindedness approach to looking at problem solving.
I like that piece, that open-mindedness and that expansiveness. Everyone always talks about, thinking outside the box, but how do you actually do that? How do you actually think outside the box? Or just some people like unreasonably blessed, and the rest of us just have to struggle inside the box endlessly. Um, I think it's really important that mindfulness as a practice lets us know um, that we can exit the box, and ultimately the box is of our own making, right? That we impose those constraints, and the moment we can see through that, then we can find solutions that might not have even felt like a possibility. And I think you're seeing that with some of the things. I mean, you're seeing that with the technological revolution of sorts. People create things that nobody ever foresaw. Well, how did they do that? Are those just special people that only have the ability to do that? Well, no. I mean, they're wired like humans, like the rest of us. Were they there, right place, right time, right idea? Sure. And yet, when we really access the genius, and I think ultimately genius is the capacity to think differently than some other people. And of course, that means that everybody has their own unique genius. And so when we can access the genius of all of our team members, then we have a real chance to sort of take everything to the next level. And I think that's one of the things that's been missed is there's sort of this old world thinking and ideology around the leader has all the answers. They became the leader because they're the smartest or they're the best at the job. And they have more value because of that. It's reflected in pay, which is understandable to a certain degree, but it's not understandable, I think, from a perspective of all the best ideas come from the leader. They clearly could not and do not. And so I think once a team recognizes, including the leader recognizing, or leaders, or whatever the structure of a given company is, and of course, we could debate what's the healthiest structure and those sorts of things. But once everybody recognizes that uh, everybody benefits, um, we have met some resistance around, um, I mean, mindfulness has sort of become a buzzword, but often it's just sort of interjected into companies in little spot ways, like spot welding, rather than a real cultural change. It's often actually used as sort of a sedative to sort of like keep keep the employees happy and resilient, so they can continue working within dysfunctional systems. And so, I guess I'm posing the question is to take teams to a really newly collaborative and functional and optimal place in a way that they're not being sort of forced to be more productive, but they become naturally more productive because there's real alignment and real synergy and respect and connection. W- what do you think is going to take? It's going to take sort of in the ethos at large for companies to really see that value beyond sort of, oh, we're sort of checking a box.
Yeah, I mean, it really stems from a willingness to see differing perspectives and to not only acknowledge them, but to accept them. And so, a lot of times in organizations, leaders are looked upon not only as having all the answers, but also as like not necessarily approachable. And so I think it's really this idea of flattening the hierarchy so that everyone becomes a leader and everyone, we can approach everyone's ideas with like a non-judgmental mindset. And so solutions can come from anywhere within the organization. Um, they don't have to fit this rigid definition of, a top-down approach or needing approval from a certain individual within the organization, that it really becomes this collaborative effort and can come from anywhere.
Hmm. Would you say that generally in your experience, and I know this is sweeping, but like, would you say that generally leadership in companies is relatively insecure about feeling like they need to be the ones to come up with ideas?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I think absolutely leaders, by definition, um, or maybe the old definition, because this is sort of a new paradigm of leadership that we are um, at the forefront of, I believe. But yes, it is. It's typically believed that they should hold all the answers, and that if they don't know, if they're holding doubt, that somehow is you know questions their authority. And so, how can we bring more vulnerability to this idea of leadership? That, like, again, we're human, so we all have doubts. We all sometimes don't believe in our ability to make a decision. We all need to look to others for guidance sometimes. And so, yeah, it's really a paradigm shift, but certainly the old paradigm is leaders are expected to hold the wisdom.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I mean, I've seen that in my own individual coaching work, is how can leaders feel safe enough to be human and to be vulnerable in the ways that you're naming. Um, and it often takes a lot of time and recognition. I've been graced by wonderful mentors over the years, and they always say, let people see your imperfections. And and but for so many leaders, it's so frightening. But what they don't realize is when they show their imperfections and their humanness, they actually become better leaders. They become more effective because their team members connect to them as people and want to support them as a person rather than as someone who's afraid of their leadership. That's psychological safety isn't just for the employees; it's for everyone. And so leaders don't have to hold all this stress either. And so, of course, big decisions need to be made, and those can be challenging, but you don't have to be alone to do those. And I think that comes back to the first piece of our focus, which is around communication. I think teams have to communicate, but of course, integral to that is leaders need to feel like they can share their personal selves and recognize that that's not a destructive thing to do. In an ethos where everybody understands that everybody's doing their best, and that teams don't lose faith in a leader that doesn't know. They actually trust a leader that doesn't know more, because that person shows that there's not some special information somewhere that only leaders have access to. I think the companies have sort of that have falsified that moving forward. Those are the ones that fail. Those are the ones that run themselves into the ground because that's not sustainable, because it's not true. And so, yeah, such an important point. Anything else on team collaboration and communication that you think it's important to highlight today?
Yeah, I would just say to that point, because it's such an important one, is the irony is that there's such a strength in softness. And so when we can be vulnerable and we can share our human side, that's where we are relatable. And so I think that being relatable within the setting of like a team is where the magic happens, not by being isolated. But yeah, I mean, mindfulness helps in, obviously, we've discussed a number of them, but to be able to be attuned to one another and calm and present is really like how we create this idea of sustainable progress.
Mm. Wow, such a great point. Years ago, when I started studying mindfulness, that idea of soft being stronger, um, I came up with a personal sort of internal phrase or mantra that I'd use, and it was soft adapts and brittle breaks. And so I like metaphors. So I use the example of a glass jar. And if there's a sheet hanging on the clothesline and there's grass beneath, and you throw a glass jar at the sheet catches it and rolls it down to the grass, and the jar doesn't break. If you throw that glass jar against a brick wall, of course it shatters. And so I think that's one of the things we see is when we have these really brittle setups, I mean, you see it. I mean, a rigid stop sign, a really strong wind blows over. It doesn't hurt the grass at all. The grass just waves in the wind and is fine. And so, but I think it takes sort of a really, well, frankly, a mature understanding to take that ideology and implement it in a way that sees things. Again, we both love that word sustainable, but like in a longer range vision, it's just not about being right and wrong. It's about being effective. And right and wrong doesn't get you there. And so yes, it's so important and in communication too. Nobody needs to be right, nobody needs to be wrong. Let's focus on what is actually useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the differing perspectives are so important when we talk about making progress in any area of life, because oftentimes the solutions are something that we've never even thought of. And so just being non-judgmental and being open to creative ideas from any level of the organization um, is so important in that idea of collaborative, communicative, um, organizational effectiveness.
Yeah, yeah. Let's focus a little bit more on the other piece around productivity and focus. Um, how does that relate to communication? Like, how does communication support that or result from that? Um, again, I've mentioned a little bit around productivity being not something that we sort of like force people into, but that we create an atmosphere where they want to be productive, where there's, that's an emergent quality, and a byproduct of good communication sort of thing. But I'm curious your thoughts on productivity and focus and how they relate to each other and or communication.
Yeah, I totally agree. People are productive when they're aligned with a vision and a purpose, um, and so that requires communication. If you don't know what you're working towards or what you're working for, then there's certainly a loss of attention and focus and really like a will to participate. And so that's super important, is communicating the why. um, and then it's the quality of work too. And I think that focus really has an important role in, because you can go through the motions and you can get things done on a daily basis, but like, what is the quality of that work, and how um, and then are you working sort of as a silo, or are you communicating with other people within the organization to sort of um, to to create a better version of what you could alone. So I mean, it's all in. I think it's all intertwined. But this idea of communicating vision and purpose and the why behind the work is crucial.
Wow, I like that. I mean, sometimes focus can be seen as just like focus, but focus can also be like I mean, I know you're not referring to it as a meta level, but like this sort of greater focus, like, are we aligned with purpose and meaning? And that supports sort of the more minutia focus at times as well. And again, when that informs our communication, uh, we just again we move. I like that metaphor of an organism. We move in harmony with each other. Um, so I have sort of a strange question.
Hmm.
Um, we're saying all these things are important. You and I have been collaborating over the last 6 months. Um, where do you think you and I are doing these things relatively well together, or where we could stand to improve a little bit? How is this showing up as far as our communication style and our staying focused and being productive? What is there anything about our process that might be useful to listeners?
Um, Definitely, I think that's a fun way to um, put into practice what we're talking about. But we started initially with a shared vision that was very important. We iterated that vision to uh, incorporate both of our individual ideas and thoughts about the unique position we're both coming from, and then where we both want want to be. So integrating past, present, future, I think is important. Um, we've been super communicative from my perspective, although I do believe that there's always room for improvement and growth in that department. Um, there's so much that can come from a 30-minute conversation in terms of ideas and direction. Um, but generally, we're aligned, and we've been aligned from the outset, and I think that's what has generated as much progress as we've had thus far. And there's always room for growth, and I think we're aligned on that too.
Mm.
There's We can always be better.
Yeah, no, I feel very similarly. And I mean, I think the fact that we have both in the process of designing MindDev been really honest with each other and uh, talked through details. Um, and you named something that I think is really important, which is it feels like a shared something. I mean, if any of our listeners know about why coaching has efficacy, is if the coach just tells the coachee what to do, they're not going to do it, even if it's the best thing to do, because it's not their idea, because they have no ownership of it. They're just being told what to do. And so if the coachee doesn't come up with some portion of the action item, then there's no ownership around it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the moment that people are included in the design, there's ownership. Anytime I like to be creative, I like to push things forward. Anytime I notice myself doing that in an overly heavy-handed way, I recognize that I'm just isolating myself and I'm just going to end up with my toys all alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a dumb thing to do. And so I think it's really important to notice that. And we all do that to a certain extent when we get excited and want this thing to be what we want it to be, whatever that project may be, whether it's internal to a company or a shared vision like we have. But anytime we're doing too much and not including others, it's doomed to failure because they're not going to execute on it because they didn't have a part in designing it. And in a company, you can't necessarily have everybody. If there's a team of 1,000, everybody can't have this thing that they say, oh, that's the thing that I brought necessarily. But if you can't find a way for them to feel like that, it's doomed. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about a mindfulness informed coaching approach, but especially at scale, is people can relate to it and engage with whatever the task is in a way that brings them in. That's where belonging is so important, of course, is if they don't feel like they belong, you can tell them the thing that's going to make them $1 million and they still won't do it. They don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. That idea of ownership and belonging and share. I mean, even all the coaches that we've spoken to thus far who are on board with this vision are excited because they feel seen and heard and supported. Like, somewhere along their journey, they've also had this vision, or that they recognize a need for it, and so they feel seen and heard and supported, even though we're just getting going.
Mhm.
And so then you have momentum behind this shared vision, and that's what really pushes it forward. It's like, um, yeah, everyone is present and aligned.
Hmm. Can you share with our listeners approximately how many coaches have shared that they're interested in this vision?
It's probably almost 50 coaches so far.
Wow, that's pretty great. I mean, we just announced it once, and that was a few months ago, and yeah, so yeah, I mean, we're really excited, and I agree with that completely. Any project that I've ever had that I felt like came from sort of a deep place, it wasn't mine. It was when I share this, I'm going to find other people that have had this same vision, and that doesn't have to be some huge world transformation vision. It can be a product idea within a company. It can be, oh, it'd be nice if the flow of meetings went this way instead of, I mean, it can be really simple. But the moment you have people that feel like they're seen and heard, then they're all in. And it's just befuddling to me how few companies actually seek that piece and then wonder why their employees are underperforming or don't want to be there or hate their jobs or only give their company 20% of their time because they're on social media the 80% rest of the time, and then blame the employee and say, oh, it's your fault that you don't care about the thing that I won't invite you to.
Yeah. And it really, it all comes back to this idea that we're humans, right? We're not machines. And so people need to feel valued and understood on that level.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. So we've got just a few more minutes here, and I'm wondering if any of our listeners want to put a question or two in the chat, and if not, that's okay. But the invitation is there. Uh, Hopefully, you haven't put one yet, and I missed it because I don't see any. But we're happy to respond if anyone has any reflections or anything they want to share from their own experience, even on these areas of team collaboration, communication, productivity, focus, and how all those things maybe relate. And while we wait for that possibility, um, I just want to thank you for your work, Amy. I know you have separate projects from this project as well, and that I mean, when you reached out initially, it was clear that you had arrived at the same place and had done a lot of the similar work on your own. And again, that's part of what has made this possible, is that, oh, it's, kinship folks find each other. And if you hadn't reached out, I wouldn't have known that you were out there. So I guess I put that out to our listeners as well, is, if you have an idea for something that might integrate into MindDev or another project, who knows? Mindful Life, Mindful Work is sort of in a state of expansion right now. We have the MindDev coaching program, which is um, our main service offering that we're developing. We have Mindswell Marketplace, which is a product marketplace and e-commerce marketplace for folks that want to sell mindful and intentional products. We just launched Mindset Social, which is a mindful social media platform. We're excited about that. We just passed 400 members in our first, I think, under 2 months. So that's growing. And we started offering public workshops and courses and webinars and things like that, of which this is included. Amy, do you want to say anything about your work?
Yeah, well, at first, I appreciate you, and I'm really looking forward to building this with you. And I appreciate all the work you've done. It really resonates with me in my journey. I am currently focused in my work on building mindful leaders and well-being cultures. So this idea of sustainable business can only be achieved through mindful leadership and building healthy organizational cultures. So that's what I'm focused on, and I always say what we're seeking is seeking us.
Hmm.
So put put your ideas out into the universe, and you'll be surprised what you get back.
And are you, and so with your own business, separate from Mindful Life, Mindful Work, are you, is there any particular demographic or target or business size, or do you work with individuals or small teams or big teams, or what would you say is sort of your niche?
Mostly small to medium sized teams and leaders, CEOs, founders. Yeah, it's a business development, innovative business development agency, I would say, or consultancy. So you can work with any. The demographic of business is not necessarily relevant.
And where can folks find more about you?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And how do you spell your last name?
REISS.
There you go. So we do have a couple of comments. So the first one is from someone named Krista. Thank you for your comment. It says, just a comment, the concept of an organization's culture being influenced by whomever is the leader is so essential. Very interesting. So thank you for your comment, Krista. And then there's another comment from Amy. She says, hi, a stressed leader means stressed employees, and people are arriving to the workplace carrying their own stressors and often sleep deprived, about 77%, in fact. Would it be advantageous for companies to offer something like Yoga Nidra, guided meditative rest in the workplace? If so, and as a Yoga Nidra facilitator, how do you recommend moving forward with teams? Thank you. Um, I can start on that a little bit. If you're not familiar with Richard Miller's work with iRest, which is a Yoga Nidra based practice, Richard's been doing his work for, I think, at least 20 years. His website might still be irest.us. And I know he's done a lot of work with the VA and veterans across the United States. So that's one place is you could plug into Richard's work. The difficult thing, and this is piece of what Mindful Life, Mindful Work has been working towards solving, and is continuously working towards solving, is people doing good work um, in sort of this, I don't want to call it self-care, but like self-supporting of people. It can be really tough to get into companies, and that's the hard piece, right? Like, and that's Mindful Life, Mindful Work. It's part of the reason we created MindDev, is there's all these amazing mindfulness informed coaches doing their coaching work, and they're probably working mostly with individuals, and they can't get into these big contracts because they're hard to get into. You have to, businesses like to do work and with other businesses. And so you got to create a business very often. And that's why Mindful Life, Mindful Work exists, is how do you get into these conversations? And, over the years, our sales cycle with larger companies is 18 to 24 months. It's not like, oh, you just find the work and get it. So that it can be challenging. So my recommendation to you would be connect with folks on Mindset Social. It's mindset-social.com. There's lots of people arriving there that probably are asking these same questions. And it's a really important question because I think, one of the challenges in businesses is they often see a meditation or yoga teacher as just sort of a health instructor, like physical health. Even, I mean, even meditation, sort of like, oh, mental health, sort of. And so to be actually seen in the business case, to actually get paid what you're worth, takes a different sort of conversation and a different presentation. And I'll use myself as an example. For the first 10 years that I did coaching, I didn't use the word mindfulness or the word meditation because I knew the CEOs I was talking to would hang up the phone if I did. And so I didn't see that as a diminishment of my offering. I saw that as a skillful means in translating what I knew would be useful for them in a way that they could receive it and feel safe receiving it. Um, and so those, and again, like your capacity to translate your services and to position them as supportive of whatever the business needs support on, that's the piece. Forget about the services. Focus on the results. What results does a company want to see? So that's my first thought. But yeah, reach out on Mindset Social. Um, yeah, start a conversation. I think we've got a pretty good community growing. Amy, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a poignant topic. Sleep deprivation is a huge problem amongst leaders. And so focusing on the problem versus the solution, I think can guide you to the right place to start. But you're right. I mean, I spent a couple years trying to convince a public company that I worked for, finance company, that they should include yoga and meditation. And ultimately, they have to, it goes through HR, and then they have to leave it up to the individual employee. And so this idea of creating a business around it where you can have offerings, and maybe Jonathan, MindDev is also a platform where that offering yoga as a form of coaching for the purpose of alleviating sleep deprivation is an offering that we can include in our sort of subsect of coaching offerings. So yeah, I think finding the right people to get you to the right place is important.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Yeah, and that's a great ad. Go to mindfulwork.com, go to our contact page. I think there's a link that's called Call for Coaches. Click on that and submit your interest. We don't know when or how or what over time is going to unfold exactly. But if you want your name on the possible roster of coaches when that time comes, submit that form so you're in our spreadsheet. And I see a response. Thank you, and then thanks. Will do. I appreciate you both. So we should close. We've gone a little bit over time. Amy, I appreciate you. You're so much fun to work with and have such great ideas. And I think we're doing something unique and special, and that the world really needs. So I appreciate that.
Likewise, Jonathan.
Okay.
Looking forward to the unfolding.
Okay. Bye, everyone. See y'all later.